If you want to virtually raise your hand, you can. If anyone has any thoughts. Teachers are really good with awkward silences. I would love to create as much as possible a sense that we're in a class together, which means including voices other than my own. But if nobody has anything to say, as the teacher, I will say what I have to say. All right, I guess I will say what I have to say. And if anyone, please do interrupt me. You are able to unmute yourselves, so please do if you have a burning thing that you have to say. So I think that, the way I'm framing this for today is we're thinking about different ways of thinking about justice, chiefly sort of notions of justice that think about justice in terms of retribution or reward and punishment, and notions of justice that have to do with restoration. And I think before I sort of tease out a little bit from those verses and look at some more texts, we're getting more people coming in all the time, which is wonderful. Welcome, if you're late. So just a few quick kinds of some quick definitions. So when we talk about retributive justice, what do we really mean? So one way, there's many ways of thinking about what retributive justice means. But in general, and if there are lawyers or political scientists on the call who want to correct my definition, again, please feel free. But in general, when we're talking about retributive justice, we're talking about systems of law in which the levers of justice are created in such a way as to reward good behavior and mete out punishment for bad behavior. So if you are evil, you're going to get punished. The law is going to be thrown at you and you're going to get punished. And if you're good, you're going to get rewarded. That's how sort of systems of justice that are retributive work. And, of course, for much of human history, including the world in which we live, many aspects of the judicial systems of which we are a part take retribution and to some extent reward, but I think mostly retribution very seriously, right? If you break the law, there is a punishment, which is supposed to be a deterrent and also supposed to be a way of rehabilitating the human person and so on and so forth. But if you break the law, there's going to be a punishment, some sort of retribution. Restorative justice, on the other hand, takes as its primary goal not punishing the transgressive act, but instead, after a transgressive act or after harm has been caused, seeking to restore a prior state of harmony. And the way most people who think about conflict resolution talk about restoring harmony is they think about fulfilling unmet needs. Fulfilling unmet needs of the parties involved in the conflict. Usually, mainly, and primarily the needs of the victimized party. Right? So if you've been the victim of a transgressive act, and we're thinking about a sort of a restorative model of justice, or sort of a model of conflict resolution that sort of takes the idea of restoration very seriously, primarily you are going to want to get your needs fulfilled to the extent that that is possible by the perpetrator. But also, in the context of doing that, we're paying attention to the needs of the perpetrator as well, and trying to restore sort of a primary state of harmony. So I think that, because the Torah is anything if not complex and multivocal, so we have both of those ideas expressed pretty prominently in Jewish sacred literature. So the first text from Devarim, it seems to me, though you're welcome to argue with me about this, it seems to me is pursuing a kind of retributive model of justice. Tzedek, tzedek tirdof. You should really pursue justice in order that you should live long, or if you don't, you will not, right? That the implication there. And that you should inherit the land that God has given you. And it doesn't say it particularly in this verse, but it says it very clearly elsewhere, that if you don't do that, the land is going to throw you out. As opposed to the second text, Sur me'ra ve'aseh tov bikesh shalom v'rofehu, right? Turn from evil and do good, search out peace, right? And pursue it, which is not the same necessarily, or in all cases, as searching out justice. So that's kind of my opening gambit, so to speak, and I want to pause there just for a second to sort of invite any thoughts about this, either about whether you agree that justice and peace, the pursuit of justice and peace, are in conflict with each other, or about your sense of these psukim. That's sort of one thing you could sort of comment on. Or another comment I want to invite is how you think these versions or different kinds of notions of justice fit into what we do around the high holidays, what the liturgy is talking about, and what we're sort of how the experience of the holidays encourages us to think about these issues. Any thoughts?
This is Harold. I'm thinking that there's a real connection between the two, particularly in light of some of the activity this summer, where we've heard chants of no justice, no peace. So there is a connection between the two. They aren't completely opposing.
Yeah, no. I agree with you. I think that, and I think thank you for bringing. I think that particular line is. I'm surprised I actually hadn't thought of that line. Just to bring up, you're exactly right. Thank you for bringing that up. Right? No, I think you're very right. I think they are. They are certainly related, right? No justice, no peace. There are similar kinds of lines in Jewish tradition. The one I'm thinking of in particular is Ein Kemach, Ein Torah, which literally means no flour, no Torah. But it means, figuratively, it means if you're starving, you're not going to be able to study much Torah, right? But right, no justice, no peace. So right, so there is a relationship there. And I think we would all hope that as societies become more just, they also become concomitantly more peaceful. Or maybe the reverse is true too. As they become more peaceful, they become concomitantly more just. Yeah, thank you. I in setting those up in opposition, I don't mean to say that they're unrelated, but I do think there is a tension there, which we'll explore a little bit in a second. Jane, you want to jump in? Jane Gavin?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a question about the retributive justice.
Yes.
So is it just punishment in the abstract, or should there be a particular lesson for the guilty party to learn not to do this particular thing wrong again?
Right. I mean, so it's good. I'm curious. So I think, my purpose here is not necessarily to articulate what I think of as necessarily the most just kind of system. I suppose probably most of us ideally would say on some level, the punishment should fit the crime. In Jewish tradition, I'll just say that there is a very prominent notion of midah keneged midah, right? The thing that you do, the thing that happens to you follows from the thing that you do, right? So there's this notion that not all crimes are equal, and not all punishments fit all crimes equally. When we think about the holidays, though, I mean, the liturgy of the holidays, at least on Yom Kippur, is largely about crime, right? It's about how we all have, right? We're all sinners on this call, okay? We're all sinners, and we've all committed crimes. The punishment, at least as described in the Machzor. Now, I don't think that probably anybody, even people who are at the Machzor, believe this is exactly how it always works. But the punishment described in the Machzor, right, is that if you do tshuva, if you try to repent of your crimes, the reward is another year. You're going to get a good chatima, and if you don't, the retribution is that you're not inscribed that year. Any other thoughts about this before we look at a few other a few other texts? All right, let's look at another text. I want to show you a few texts very quickly, and then we'll focus in on a few texts. We'll sort of midway through a little bit more intensely. So, text 3 is Mishnah Rosh Hashanah, a very famous Mishnah, which is just worth knowing. It's also quoted in Unatana Tokef a little bit later. So, be'arba prakim ha'olam nidon. In 4 periods, the earth is judged. But Pesach alatfuah, at Pesach it's judged with regard to grain, whether or not you're going to get a good harvest that year. Be'atzeret al perot ha'ilan. So in Atzeret, which is the rabbinic word for Shavuot, the world is judged about tree-bearing fruit. If you're going to get nice cherries and peaches that year, that's when that judgment is happening. But Rosh Hashanah, Kol Bai Ha'olam Ovrim Lefanav Kivnei Maron. Right? And on Rosh Hashanah, all inhabitants of earth will come before him, God, or God there, Kivnei Maron, as sheep. What Kivnei Maron means is a little bit mysterious. We'll translate it as sheep right now. As it says, Hayotzer Yachad Libam Hamevin Al Kol Maasehem. Right? He forms their hearts together and understands all their deeds. Ubechag nidon alamayim. And on the Chag, which is Shavuot, for them, you're judged about water. So are you going to get rains, ample rains that year? Which, if you're living in the desert, or if you're living in California, if you're living many places, right, rain is a blessing, right? So you want to have ample rains. So Rosh Hashanah and, in relationship to Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur is this period of intense judgment, okay? And I want to just follow it up with just this short thing from the Talmud. So the question is, what reason is it that Hallel is not said on Rosh Hashanah? So we say Hallel, these celebratory psalms on Sukkot and on Hanukkah and on Pesach and so on and so forth. Why aren't they said on Rosh Hashanah? Okay. Amar Rabbi Abahu, right? Rabbi Abahu says the ministering angel was once asked of God, Master of the universe, why don't Israelites sing songs of praise for you on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? He said to them, when the king sits on the throne of justice with the books of life and death open before him, would it be appropriate to sing songs? And the implied answer to that rhetorical question is no, and so therefore we don't sing songs. What I want to sort of tease out from this is, and I think we experience Yom Kippur this way as contemporary Jews often, but I'm not sure if we experience Rosh Hashanah this way. These were really supposed to be fearsome days, right? That the specter of divine retribution in, a quite direct, real way, casts a very long or very frightening shadow over these days. These are sort of really portentous days. And the threat of retribution is what makes those days so intense. I'll try this. As I fiddle with my tech here, I will invite any thoughts or comments about any of these Mishnayot. Any ideas? All right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Not so much a thought, but of the 4 judgments, 3 of them are very much sort of ecologically related, right? It's about grain harvest, water, fruit harvest. One of them is all about the people, and I'm wondering what the connection is between the 3 that are the festivals, that are we know they're agriculturally based, but Rosh Hashanah doesn't seem to fit into that group at all.
So I think that it's interesting you said that they were ecological. I'm not sure who said that. I didn't, because I couldn't click to you fast.
It was me, Manny Spira.
Hi, Manny. Thanks. So right. So the 3 are ecologically based. I think that, and I say this, somewhat with a heavy heart. I think that I think they're ecologically based in the sense that they obviously have to do with, the plant world and water cycles and so on and so forth. But I think they are like Rosh Hashanah. My sense of ancient rabbinic literature is that it's even those are extremely anthropocentric. In other words, I don't think the concern there is really about ecology or the environment at all. I think the concern is about the reason why we care whether or not the fruit trees are going to grow well that year is because human beings are going to eat them. Now, so I think in that sense they are sort of a piece with what's going on Rosh Hashanah. In other words, if you're going to be inscribed for a good year, well, that's probably going to have to include, good apple harvest and good wheat harvest and ample water, particularly if you're living in the desert. Otherwise you're gonna starve. Go ahead.
Let me ask it differently then, which is, what is other than obviously life, life or death being the essential need on Rosh Hashanah, how does it fit into the others? So of course we need fruit and grain and water. What are we getting? What are we being judged with respect to? Is it a spiritual fulfillment? What are we being granted that adds to our life for the year?
You mean like on Sukkot? What are we being judged about such that we would get good water or bad water?
No, the other way around. So on Sukkot, we're going to be, if we're judged well, we will be granted water. On
Right.
Shavuot, we will be granted the fruits.
Right.
What are we being granted other than all which are related to life? But then, why on those are we being granted pieces of life? What is the piece of life that we're being granted on Rosh Hashanah?
Oh, that's an interesting. Oh, right, it's an interesting question. Is it entirely parallel?
Is it a spiritual piece? Is it what are we being granted to allow us to live?
What's the specific thing? The easiest answer is probably we're being granted, a positive chatima. We're going to be inscribed in the book of life. So that is that parallel in the same way that we're being granted sort of a water or grain. I'm not sure. I think it's an interesting question. I would say the easy answer is, we're granted a chatima. That's what, Gemar Chatima Tova means. May you be granted a good inscription. If you think about Unatana Tokef, which is, that piyut in Musaf, who will live, who will die, who will be made rich, who will be poor, who will be troubled, who will be at ease, who will live a long life, who will be cut short. There's different kinds of, ideas about what that might be. But that's a good question. I'm not sure if I had a great answer there, but I'm not sure if it's exactly parallel. I think that's an interesting question. All right, so I want to look at another text. This is the only modern text we're going to look at, and I think it frames some of the final texts in a nice way. And the way I want to preview it is. I'll just get to the text, and then I'll explain afterwards. So, this is on page 3, which I think you can see over here on the right side of my screen. Give me a thumbs up if you can see that. Great. So, this is actually published in the Sun magazine, which I don't know if it is still published. It was a sort of a literary thought magazine that was published in Chapel Hill, I believe. For many, many years, which I know about because I love Chapel Hill, and this was an interview with the late psychologist Marshall Rosenberg, who was very, very proud. He died in 2015, I believe. He was very prominent in the field of conflict resolution. He also happened to be Jewish. This is him, and he was a very, very big proponent of restorative justice, or integrating restorative approaches to justice in in contemporary judicial systems. And I know most of you guys have been reading yourselves for a long time, but I'll read it for you anyways. So he says, the way you control people, given that our nature is evil and selfish, is through a system of justice in which people who behave in a good manner get rewarded, while those who are evil are made to suffer. In order to see such a system as fair, one has to believe that both sides deserve what they get. And I want to pause there and point out something that I think is going to be, important for some of what I want to explore in the last half of this short session, which is that your approach to justice, I think, and I think Marshall Rosenberg points this out in a very cogent way. I think your approach to justice is related very much to your anthropology. In other words, who do you think the human person is? What kinds of creatures do you think your system is meant to work for? And I think that, and so I want to pause there just for a second and then get to sort of the second half of what you're going to say in a second. I want to ask you guys a question, though. Based on your experience of the Machzor or your experience of the holidays, how do you think we are meant to think about the human being? Does the experience of the holidays suggest that the human being is evil and selfish, or not? What kind of, if we're thinking about a sacred anthropology, a sacred accounting of the human being, what kind of human being are we dealing with when we think about, let's say, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? Any thoughts about this?
This is Harold again.
Hi, Harold.
Yeah, I can turn my video on. So that's not my experience. I mean, I would say weak, not able to live up to the standard, but not evil. No, I don't.
Yeah, by the way, I didn't mean it as a leading question. I meant it as a genuine question. I mean,
Yeah.
So you think that the Machzor mainly presents the human being as weak? Yeah, you might be right. That's interesting. That's an interesting perspective. Any other thoughts?
I think it's interesting that here in the language he uses, he said people who behave in a good manner while those who are evil. So there's an implication there that people are evil, but they can choose to behave in a good manner, but doesn't make them good people. So I think that he seems to be sort of suggesting in that language that people are sort of inherently bad and can choose to do good. I think you can see that in the Machzor, like we are evil and you should choose good. But I don't know that that's necessarily the
interesting.
Right. People
interesting. No, that's good. That's really good, like rabbinic parsing of the language. Behave in a good manner and are evil. I had never noticed. I've read this text for many years. I had never noticed that, or I never paid attention to that distinction. Yeah, that's interesting. So you think the Machzor presents people as basically evil?
Not necessarily. I think it presents that we have the potential to be either, and
right.
And throughout the text, all the text, there's the choose good. I'm laying before you. This isn't the Machzor, but I'm laying before you good and evil. Choose good, right?
Right.
So I think it is laid out as a choice.
Yeah, no, I think that's a crucial aspect of Jewish thought in general, right? That it is possible to choose good, just as it is possible to choose evil. My own sense, though, and this is just my cards, and my own sense of the Al Chaitz, those long, the long confessionals that we say 5 times if we're in shul all day on Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Kippur, where we were slanderous and we were licentious and we were stole and we were, right? Those are declarative statements. They're not statements that, at least liturgically, I mean, they're not statements that say we have the potential to steal and do lashon hara and murder and kill and all of these things. They say no. We definitely did. And unless you forget that you did, we're just going to give you a long list of all of the things you did. Now, whether or not that's true is not my teasing out whether or not that is true is not my aim here. But I think that though. Okay, I'll editorialize and I'll say I think we've mostly have done a lot of those things. But I think the Machzor is positioning us mainly in broad strokes. This is my contention. You're welcome to disagree with me, but it's important for the rest of the class that this is my contention. My contention is that the Machzor positions us largely in a situation where evil and transgression are basically normative, and therefore a system of reward and retribution makes sense, right? If you do tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah, you can be ma'avirin ro'a gzeira. You can cast off the evil decree. You can forego your evil decree that year. But if you don't do tshuva, tefillah and tzedakah, and try to make up for your obvious transgressions, you're not going to cast away the evil decree. Now, you could think of that in terms of retribution or restoration. I mean, tshuva, of course, means to return, right? We return to a primary state of right relation with others and with God, perhaps. But I think the language and the texture of the Machzor, at least to me, communicates a system of reward and retribution. Right? If you're naughty, if you're nice, right, you get toys. If you're naughty, you get coal. The Machzor doesn't talk about that.
But it seems oversimplified to equate transgressions with evil. My general sense is that people are given the potential to go either way, and we recognize on Yom Kippur that we may have transgressed in a lot of ways, but that doesn't classify someone as evil.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. But I think that I think you're right, and I think that, but whatever transgression you got, you deserve the comeuppance for that. I think if you, and by the way, if you look up that article, it's worth reading. It's still, I think the Sun is still online if it's not published anymore. I think his point there is that in order to see a system where, people go to jail, you go to jail or you get executed or you get whipped or any other kind of things that human beings have dreamed up for retribution, throughout history, you have to presume that, well, the people deserve what they get. So if you were, let's talk about Jewish law, right? If you cheated someone in business, well, you deserved to get 39 lashes with a whip. I mean, if you killed someone, you deserve to get executed, right? That's sort of, that's crime and punishment, reward and retribution. You deserve, even if you're not evil, right? It might not be that everyone who makes an unethical business decision is evil. I think that's true, right? I think people are, as I think Harold said, people are weak and make bad choices. But they deserve basically what they get, right? Or we presume that the system is organized in a way such that people deserve what they get. All right, I want to look at any other burning comments before we look at a few more texts. Okay, and I will warn you that I am leading another service starting at 10 or starting at 11 your time, so I'm going to cut off about a little bit early, but we should still have some time to get through a few more texts and conversation. All right, so let's look at so we can read the rest of. Well, we can read the rest of Marshall Rosenberg later. He has an interesting reflection about, it's up on the screen, you can read it if you want. He has an interesting reflection about violence in the context of community policing. Just a note there, he's not talking about war there, he's talking about community policing, which I think are slightly different situations. Okay, so let's look at text 5. So this is also a fairly famous text. See, I minimized your faces, which I like to see at least some of your faces. Makes me feel less like I'm talking to myself. Okay, so Hillel Omer, Havei mi talmidav shala haron, osev shalom verodef shalom. So Hillel used to say, this is Hillel the elder, the ancient, Torah on one foot is be nice to people, right? That guy, right? You should be a student of Aaron, loving peace, ohev shalom verodef shalom. So rodef shalom, the same word there. You should love peace and pursue peace. Ohev et habriot, love people, korvan la Torah, and draw them closer to Torah. It's a very famous line in Pirkei Avot, which also appears in the daily liturgy. So, Rabbi Meir Omer, this is text 6. Ma Talmud lomar, Torat emet hayta b'pihu, ve'avla lo nimsa b'svatav. So he brings another verse, and he says, what does this verse mean? The Torah of truth is in his mouth, and sin is not found on his lips. B'shalom u'b'mishur halach, and he walks peacefully and in a straight path. Et, with me, with God. Verabim hashiv ma'on, and turns many me'avon, and turns many from sin. So what is that verse, which is from Malachi, which he's going to describe in terms of Aaron? What does that actually mean? So, famous story. There were two men in conflict with one another. Aaron went and sat with one of them. He said to him, "My son, look what your friend is saying. He is tearing his heart and ripping his clothes, saying, 'Oi! How can I raise my eyes to see my friend?'" By the way, the oi is a word. It appears in the Talmud. It's right there. It's the same word. Okay? Oi, right? Oi, how can I raise my eyes to see my friend? For I am ashamed in front of him because I have treated him so odiously. And he sat with him until he had removed the wrath from his heart. And then Aaron went to the other, and he said to him, "My son, look what your friend is saying. He is tearing his heart and ripping his clothes, saying, 'Oi, how can I raise my eyes to see my friend? For I am ashamed in front of him because I have treated him so odiously.' And he sat with him until he had removed the wrath from his heart. When the two men saw each other, they hugged and wept. Thus it is written, when Aaron died, the house of Israel wept for him for 30 days. So, which is where we get shloshim. The reason why we mourn, there's an intense period of mourning following someone's death, is because that's what they did for Aaron. Okay, Aaron is the one that they really missed when he was gone. He probably missed Moshe too, but Moshe was a difficult character in some ways. So what does Aaron do here? All right, he basically, does he want to describe what Aaron does? What's your sense of what Aaron does here? Or how does it strike you?
Well, he lies. He lies to both of them to kind of teach them that, they're not really seeing the forest for the trees and they should kind of get over it. But it's interesting the tactic he uses, Yeah,
right. He explicitly lies, which, by the way, right, like, thou shalt not lie, right? That's a pretty clear one, right? He explicitly lies to them, and he basically tells each one that the other one regrets, even though that is not apparently true, right? It's not. We have no sense at all, and this is the only part. There's no other part of the story where it's true that one of them was actually feeling bad, right? He explicitly lies, and the other thing that I want to point out here is that the content of whatever the disagreement was is completely of no interest to the story. I mean, we don't know, right? There could have been, we don't know what these people did to one another. I mean, we don't know who was in the right. We don't know if both of them were wrong. We have no idea what. So from a perspective of justice, we have no idea how to deal with this case because we don't know any of the specifics. Right? Did one of them cheat the other one, or did one of them, I don't know. Right? We have no idea what they did. And the story is not interested in that. The story is only interested and seems to lionize the fact that at all costs, violating one of the 10 commandments, You know, Aharon wants to bring the people back together. Wants to bring the people back together, which we said early on that, or someone said, and I totally agree, that pursuing justice and pursuing peace are not always, that God forbid they should always be in conflict with one another. They are not. But I think that this story illuminates that they are not exactly the same thing. And I think we all know that they're not exactly the same thing. Like, we all have the experience, I think, of, forgiving someone, just because we want to forgive them. Not necessarily because they really did anything to deserve it, and the other way around. I'm sure we all have the experience of, being forgiven, even if we didn't really do much to deserve it. Which doesn't necessarily, but then it doesn't necessarily make the repair less real. If we're getting what we need out of the relationship, right? It seems like these two people, at least I hope, and I hope when they find out that Aaron was lying, they're not going to, start trying to kill each other again. But it seems that these two people, the need that was met was a restoration of their relationship, rather than a precise adjudication of whatever the conflict was about. And I think that this, in many ways, and the last text I wanna share with you guys, and then maybe we'll read the end of the Rosenberg, is a text from Yeshayahu Horowitz, also known as the Holy Shlah. He was a 16th century European Jewish mystic, and he wrote a voluminous mystical tome called Shnei Luchot HaBrit, the two tablets of the covenant, which is sort of a lengthy treatise on the mystical life and ethics. And he has what I think is a very arresting and important teaching about sort of who the human being fundamentally is. And this is it. It's text 8. And there's a little bit of Hebrew you need for this, so I'll try to talk you guys through it. So it says, he first opens up, peace between a husband and wife is of great value. Okay? This is this is sort of a standard Jewish phrase, shalom bait, right? Vayeh shalom gadol bein ish leishta. And, we could extend this to, but any peace between partners, peace between people who love one another is of great value. I don't think that the fact that this is a husband and wife pair is actually, it's sort of incidental to the teaching, but not, I don't think, indispensable to the teaching here. So you talk about, brothers, lovers, anybody you love, right? Kishem Yah Shorei Benehem. Because the name Yah, the divine name Yah, Yud He, Yud He Vav He, Yud He, dwells between them. Okay? So what does that mean? Right? What does that mean? So the word for man in Hebrew is ish. So Aleph Yud Shin, right, which you can see there. The word for woman is isha, Aleph Shin He. So Yud He. So you have a Yud He. You have a Yud in the ish and a He in a Yud in man and a He in woman, making ish or isha. Aleph Yud Shin or Aleph Shin He. Take away the Yud or the He from either of those words, and this is the quiz time. What word do you get? What Hebrew word do you get? Anyone? Come on, Jeopardy. I get the Jeopardy question. Anyone? Aish. Aish, which means?
Fire.
Fire. Which means fire. Which means fire. Right. So if you remove peace, right, which is here likened to divinity, right? Peace is the divine name, right? Peace between husband and wife is great value. For the divine name dwells between them, and should they experience conflict, God forbid, the divine name is erased by removing the Yud He from the words man and woman. Right? Aleph Yud Shin becomes Aleph Shin, and Aleph Shin He becomes Aleph Shin, and each is transformed into fire. Okay? Thus, Jews must pursue peace in order to be one with peace and to completely and flawlessly resemble their Creator, for the name of God is peace. In other words, it is the indwelling of the divine presence in the human being, transforming Aish into Ish or Isha, right? That makes us like God, that makes us divine creatures, and the nature of that identity is a peaceful identity. And I think I love this teaching, and maybe we'll after this we'll have time for a few more comments, but I love this teaching because, and I think, I mean, I might not be perfect disagreement on this call, and that's great. I think that somewhat unlike the Machzor, which presumes, I think, on some level that we are quarrelsome and sinful and perhaps even evil, right? Not everyone who's quarrelsome and sinful is evil, but perhaps even somewhat evil, right? Unlike the Machzor, which presumes that. I think this teaching presumes that our fundamental identity is one of peaceableness, of one of harmony, and one of divinity, right? And the sense in which we are made in the image of God is precisely the sense in which our fundamental nature is one without conflict. Our fundamental nature is one of being at peace. Right? And when we talk about, anything, when we talk about restorative things, when we talk about restoring ourselves, well, what we're trying to do, perhaps according to this, is restore ourselves to a primary identity, which is highly peaceful and inscribed, literally inscribed, but a good inscription, literally inscribed with the divine name, Yud He Vav He, Yud He. So I'm curious, how, as we have a few minutes to close, how these ideas maybe do or don't, inform how you think about, the holidays or human beings or, your experience of the holidays this year. Any thoughts about this? Or maybe some new voices that we haven't heard from yet?
This is Laura. I especially liked, not the dogs are going to bark, I'm sorry. I especially liked the story of Aaron because it's possible that as individuals we can restore relationships when we see family or friends are in conflict. And I think that that's a really lovely example of pursuing shalom.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, I think that, and just building on that a little bit, I'd love to hear from others too. I think that one of the reasons why I love that story is, right, it doesn't dwell on like the particulars of the hurt. Like, and when we're talking about, repairing relationships with family, or with anyone really, it is sometimes the case that really talking through the issue and really zeroing in on exactly what hurt you and exactly what went wrong in the relationship can be helpful. But it is sometimes the case that is not helpful, right? And I think that maybe it's more often the case, that is not helpful. And I think that this story illuminates it. I think it gives us license to, make repair, even if it seems unjust on some level, right? It seems unjust because, my friend, really did this thing to me, and it's, they don't seem to recognize it, but maybe I'll forego justice and make up with my friend because that has other benefits. Yeah, I think that's true.
I think to that point, I think that in both examples, you reach a point in a conflict where the fight becomes the point, right? Where you've passed the point, you sort of implies that Aaron realizes that in this conflict, the fight has become the point, and the point at which the fire starts, right? The fight becomes the point instead of the issue, right? The issue is no longer the point, the fight is the point. Right. And to be able to recognize either internally within your own relationship, the point at which to douse the flames, or when Aaron comes in and maybe he tells a lie. Maybe he recognizes something in the two conflicting partners, that there's a shame there. And
right, that's possible. Yeah,
is like, that is the restorative piece.
Right. No, it's possible. I'm glad you brought that up too. Right. It's not, but right. It could be that Aaron has some insight here. Right. It might not just be like a completely, a complete lie. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. Any other thoughts about this?
I thought you're talking about human nature and the whether people are inherently good or evil is interesting, because to me it's pretty clear that people are inherently good and act evil sometimes, because like when you're in conflict, you never feel good. You're never feeling at peace, or you're feeling anxious, you're feeling strife, you're feeling stressed. And only when you make up with a friend, or some sort of resolution is in place, you finally feel better again. At least that's how I am. I don't think people enjoy war or anger inherently. So I always find it interesting when people are like so zeroed in on human nature being evil and enjoying that, when it seems to me that nobody does.
I think that that's true. I would, and I'm not going to register an opinion on whether or not I think humans are fundamentally good or evil on this call, or perhaps ever. But I would only, pose the question. Well, I agree. People don't enjoy being angry, and people don't enjoy war. Most of them. I mean, most of them don't. But whether or not they enjoy it, is that necessarily a measure of whether or not it is inherently part of who they are? I mean, we're bound. There's all kinds of things that I do habitually that I really don't enjoy. Getting anger among them, right? Anger is one of my big sins. That's just Ben Resnick gets angry. I have a temper, right? So, but I certainly don't enjoy it. But I can't seem to get rid of it. There was an important sort of liberal Protestant theologian from the 1950s named Reinhold Niebuhr, which is probably a name some people on this call know. He was a friend and colleague of Abraham Joshua Heschel, and he was one of the most prominent liberal defenders of the notion of original sin. Famously in a book called Moral Man, Immoral Society, in which he said, Joan, I think sort of like you, well, most people don't want to behave immorally, right? Most people in their lives are basically moral, and yet his observation was that society, human society throughout all history has included really monstrous immorality. And he was writing immediately in the shadow of the Holocaust. He was writing in the 50s, but it doesn't have to be the shadow of the Holocaust. It could be any kind of immorality that we see. And his reasoning was, well, sin is absolutely ubiquitous. Right? We don't encounter people who don't sin. Therefore, human beings must be on some level inherently sinful. Now, they can also be inherently good. And I think Niebuhr probably would have said that too. Yeah. Any other closing thoughts?
Rabbi, this is Gary.
Yeah.
Backing up Niebuhr, if you go back to the very first line that you gave us this morning, the justice shall ye pursue.
Yeah.
If we were so good, you could stop the sentence after pursue, and you wouldn't have to put these rewards in.
Yeah.
As the consequence for pursuing justice. You would pursue justice just because that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I think you're right. Look, I think that, and then we'll close on this note, I think that the anthropology presented in the Torah is one of human complexity. I mean, we eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and we know about both good and evil, and presumably we have, a certain admixture of good and evil in our lives. And I think you're right? I think that if it was so easy to pursue justice, you wouldn't need the second half of the pasuk. I have to go lead another service in a moment, so I'm going to have to wish all of you guys a Gemar Chatima Tova. Thank you so much for joining us today. Wishing all of you a restorative and joyful holiday season, and I can't wait until it is safe for me to travel down and spend some Shabbatot with y'all down in North Carolina. Until then,
you are always welcome, Rabbi. And we have a tradition of clapping with jazz hands. So
thank you. Thanks to all of you guys.
thank you.